This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Danse, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sheila North. Janet Stewart is away. The rising cost of living this year has forced many Manitobans to do with a lot less. For some people, it's also meant doing a lot more than they'd like just to get by. CBC's Andrew Wiles has a story.
Come on, Hank.
For Sarah Hale, keeping up with the cost of living is no walk in the park. Putting herself through college earned her a bachelor's degree and 30 grand in student loan debt.
Oh, Sadie, you're so strong.
But Hale isn't going down without a fight. By day, she's an educational assistant, but she also works at Starbucks. And she babysits, house sits, and pet sits.
But like being a single income, like if anything happens, like it's coming out of my bank account. Like I don't have help financially from other people. So I have to work all of these jobs or like I'd have to take on more debt, and I really don't want to do that.
When school's in session, she works 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. Her dream is to be a teacher, but she'll have to get an education degree first.
It's exhausting. My body hurts. I just like, I tune everything else out and just focus on getting the job done, but like it comes at a cost. Sorry.
The number of Canadians working multiple jobs is on the rise. That's after a dip during the pandemic. But official data doesn't even capture people working in formal jobs, like Hale's pet sitting and people selling craft online.
For some people, it's an important supplement of income. And typically, it's not well measured in these labor force surveys, probably because the questions that we ask in these surveys, they don't exactly fit with this type of activities.
This is one of Jordan Horkey's many jobs. He works full-time selling insurance, part-time in retail, and picks up casual shifts with a sports team, a financial company, and a radio station.
So at least 2 to 3 times a week, I'll have 12-hour days, which is both physically and mentally just draining.
Harkey says he's used to doing multiple jobs to get extra cash as needed, but now it's no longer an option.
I didn't think I was going to be here at this point in my life, 32, working multiple jobs still.
Researchers say typically people working multiple jobs do it for a stint. Hale says she's looking forward to a day when she doesn't have to run out the door from one job to the next. Andrew Wiles, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Every year, about 1,500 bikes are reported stolen in Winnipeg. One of the city's mayoral candidates says he will whittle that number down. CBC's Bartley Kivas has that story.
When people get their bikes stolen, we're often the first place they come.
Rob Massey at Olympia Cycle and Ski says customers come into his shop every day to look up serial numbers for bikes they just lost to theft.
We love selling bikes, but man, we'd rather people hang on to their bikes and ride them longer and enjoy them more.
Mayoral candidate Sean Loney claims he can help. He's peddling a plan to reduce the number of bike thefts.
Bike theft is a real frustration for a lot of Winnipeggers.
Loney says he'd get rid of bike registration fees, dedicate a police officer to bike theft, and deploy more bait bikes. Loney also said Winnipeg would spend $200,000 building more secure public bike lockers. He also said he'd change city zoning bylaws to ensure bike lockers are mandatory in new developments. Rob Massey likes that idea.
I ride my bike all over the city and have parked my bike in many places and have been yelled at by people for bringing my bike inside buildings because they have no safe place for me to park my bike.
Massey's less excited about free bike registration. He says Winnipeggers can help even more by demanding to see serial numbers when they buy a used bike.
If the person doesn't want to tell you the serial number of the bike they're selling, it's probably stolen, and then don't buy it.
But this Sean Loney supporter says she's happy someone's talking about bike theft. Kiara Reiner had 3 bikes stolen since she moved here from Calgary 2 years ago.
When we first moved here and I said my bike got stolen, our neighbors were like, welcome to Winnipeg. This is what happens. Your bike gets stolen. So I'm just excited to see that someone's taking it seriously.
Loney is one of 14 candidates running for mayor. The election is 8 weeks away on October 26th. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
We are learning more about the arrest of a 15-year-old boy charged with 2 homicides in Point Douglas. Police say the teen was arrested by Manitoba First Nations Police Service in Long Plain First Nation on Saturday. Police had issued warrants for his arrest after charging another 15-year-old boy in connection with the deaths of Danielle Ballantyne and Marvin Felix. The teen arrested Saturday is charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and aggravated assault. The assault charge is in connection to a third victim also found seriously hurt on the morning of August 22nd. Heartbroken at a loss of a lovely young woman. That's what Rossbrook House is saying after the body of a 20-year-old Michaela Gerard-Rusin was found on an ATV trail near Woodbridge, Manitoba. That's southeast of Steinbach. RCMP believes she was killed in Steinbach. Police say the suspect, a 20-year-old man, Josh Benoit of Winnipeg, was arrested on Highway 52 after setting his car on fire. He is charged with first-degree murder. And Manitoba kids are heading back to school next week. Today, the province announced new funding to help make up for some of the disruptions caused by COVID-19. The CBC's Alana Cole reports.
Rory and Addie Cooney-Pikes are getting ready to get back to class. Their dad hopes this year comes with fewer ups and downs due to COVID-19.
It was tough for everyone, and I think the teachers really did an amazing job of adjusting and really going above and beyond. We found in both their classes, but I would say it definitely was disruptive. The remote learning is nowhere as good as the in-person learning, and especially kindergarten is pretty hard to teach remote.
Today's announcement is more so about getting back into the classrooms, even more so.
Today, the province announced it's a full return to in-person learning in September, including all extracurricular activities. With that, Manitoba's education minister says an extra $6.5 million will go towards what's being called post-pandemic needs. That includes $4.5 million in federal funding for ventilation projects, $150,000 for Kids Help Phone, and roughly $1 million to Manitoba's Remote Learning Support Centre for after-school help.
It's remote learning, and it's not necessarily, full-on just tutoring. It's those students that might or might not be able to access different things throughout the school year. And so we're talking, this is a grade 1 to grade 8 service, and it is open to all Manitoba students.
The province says this funding is in addition to $20 million announced in June to help students most affected by the pandemic. In a statement, the vice president of the Manitoba Teachers Society says, while today's additional funding is appreciated, our public schools still lack adequate funding to help every student learn at their best. The government's also investing $250,000 on research at the University of Manitoba. It's to better understand the effects the pandemic has had on learning. What we didn't hear today was specifics on how the province plans to track COVID-19 cases in schools. The minister says they'll be working with public health and school boards. Alana Cole, CBC News, Winnipeg.
There will be no charge if you go to a provincial park this long weekend. The Manitoba government announced today it's providing free entry to the parks to help people enjoy the outdoors. Parks Minister Jeff Wharton says with free access to the parks, there's no reason not to enjoy your favorite warm weather spots before fall. Vehicle permits will not be required, but you will still have to pay regular fees for provincial campgrounds. CBC meteorologist John Sauter joins us now. Is it going to stay this beautiful over the long weekend?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a blip, a bit of a cold front moving through, but as we get into the long weekend, the temperatures are going to start to climb again. And, I think by holiday Monday, back into the upper 20s. I'll explain. Let's start with the current conditions. 26 in Winnipeg right now, and we got just over 26 today. Winds earlier were gusting to about 40 as expected. Now the winds are starting to settle down just a little bit around northwest at 19 or 20 kilometers per hour. Pressure continues to fall off slightly. Dew point, a comfortable 14. A couple things to show you here. First of all, what jumps out to me is the absolutely clear sky across the bottom 2/3 of the province. Right now in Winnipeg, you look out the window here downtown, you see absolutely no cloud at all. This low continues to spin out over Hudson Bay. In behind it, as it pulls away, tight pressure gradient, so we had very strong winds along the Hudson Bay coast out of the north at about 80 kilometers per hour this morning. Those winds have been dropping off as that pressure gradient kind of slackens and the low continues to move on away. And in the south, we're seeing winds here that are a little strong out of the northwest thanks to this high pressure system. Around high pressure at the surface, air circulates clockwise in the northern hemisphere, so that's why we have a bit of a northwesterly flow today. Now, as that low starts to move a little closer to us, things will change a little bit. I'll explain in a minute. We got more cloud out in northern Alberta, northern Saskatchewan, and another low that'll move across into northern Manitoba in the coming days, likely Thursday afternoon and on into the evening hours. There's the low spinning out over Hudson Bay. We get a little bit more cloud across the north tomorrow, and there's that high pressure system that's starting to move our way through the day on Wednesday. By the time we get to Thursday, this high is moving a little farther to the east, so we're in the southerly or southwesterly flow, and it does get strong again. There's another low pressure system here on Thursday morning that tracks across Saskatchewan and into the afternoon is starting to spread some heavier rains across into northern Manitoba once again. Now you see this line right here. This is the cold front that's connected to that low pressure system. And on Thursday night, that swings through the south and moves out into northwestern Ontario. This is quite a weather maker. Lots of rain across the north Thursday into Friday morning. And by Friday, we're back into sunshine, but we're on the cold side of the low. And we've got northwesterly winds. So that's the cool down that I was talking about as we head toward the weekend. Projected rainfall amounts from now until early on Friday, looking pretty significant up around the Hudson Bay coast and the far north. So this is noon on Friday. Not so much farther south, and really no rain at all in the forecast for southern Manitoba. We might see a sprinkle Thursday night as that cold front moves on through. But 13 tonight, clear skies. Sunny, light wind, 16 first thing in the morning, and then all the way to 30 degrees tomorrow in Winnipeg, even warmer west of here. West winds around 30 to 40 in the afternoon, and then it's even warmer on Thursday with that southerly flow, a little bit of a shower possible while you're sleeping Thursday night. And look how much cooler it is on Friday. And then we start to work our way back into the mid, even upper 20s through the long weekend.
Weather update is brought to you by Home Equip, your trusted local source for Pride Mobility scooters. From sales to rental and repair, our team is here to serve you.
In Alberta tonight is the final debate in the race to lead the United Conservative Party and a takeover as premier. Now, two of the candidates are telling CBC News they have received death threats over the course of the campaign. Travis Toews and Brian Jean both say they've each been the subject of at least one death threat. Toews is Alberta's former finance minister. A spokesperson says online group suggested he be hanged for his role in government during COVID-19. Former Wild Rose leader Brian Jean says he got a phone call with a death threat earlier in the campaign. Both candidates say that the threats won't derail the race. The UCP announces its new leader on October 6th. And the RCMP are now investigating after Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland was accosted in Alberta over the weekend by a man who repeatedly yelled profanity at her and called her a traitor. Yesterday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was calling for political leaders to take a unity stance against threats of violence and intimidation.
Doing in Alberta, you traitors.
A Manitoba politician is among those speaking out after the Deputy Prime Minister was subject to a tirade of verbal abuse in Alberta. In a video, a man is shown yelling profanities and intimidating Chrystia Freeland in Grande Prairie last week. NDP MLA Nahani Fontaine says she was sick to her stomach when she saw the video. She says she has faced the same type of harassment.
And, unfortunately, it's something that many of us, many women politicians understand and actually face ourselves. And I would suggest that particularly, women and gender diverse BIPOC politicians know that all too well. and face that, either online or in person or in emails or in DMs. Like, it's actually nonstop. And so, as one woman politician to another woman politician, I was quick to denounce what I saw and, offer support and solidarity to the Deputy Prime Minister, as we should be doing. One of the things that I think is really disconcerting is when you see, narrative or discourse online saying, well, she deserved it. And, if you're a politician, you should expect that this is going to happen. No public servant gets into this job, particularly women and particularly BIPOC women politicians get in this job to be harassed, intimidated, bullied, and to face that level of violence. And it's, I think, really indicative of the levels of violence and the ways that they manifest themselves for women in politics. For me, I started campaigning in 2016, and it happened immediately on the campaign trail. And in fact, I remember one particular all candidate forum. And the campaign manager of the, one of the other folks that were running was standing outside the only doors that you could exit and was swearing, saying, she's going to effing get it, wait till she effing gets it, referring to me. And I actually had to be surrounded by supporters in order to leave a space. And that was the first kind of, incident like that. But it hasn't stopped. I mean, as just less than a year ago, I organized a pro-choice abortion rally. And just as I was getting up to go and speak to the folks that were there, a gentleman started to try to get up the stairs to get to me. Luckily, I'd already alerted my staff and the security, and they blocked him. But then after the event, several legislative security had to block him from getting to me. So, this is not uncommon. And, you're always asked as women politicians, well, you've got to develop thick skin. Trust me, I have thick skin. And, I would suggest and submit that most women politicians have thick skin. We wouldn't be elected if we didn't. But what that does is that diminishes the level of risk and threat that we're under. And then you have politicians that are, particularly those that are on the right, who actually fan the flames and are creating a really dangerous environment rather than coming out quickly and swiftly denouncing these types of actions. We just saw the other day, from the leader or from somebody who's, trying to be the next prime minister, attempt to make it about himself in a 30-second clip. We need politicians of all stripes to immediately and quickly denounce this, and particularly men to stand up for their women colleagues. I think that there's, this reality that for women and gender diverse folks, the expectation on us is that we need to shrink ourselves. We need to, not make any sudden moves that's going to irritate or escalate the men that, show violence against us. And, I personally, I refuse to accept that. I refuse to accept that I have to operate in a space where, one, I can't operate the same as my male colleagues, two, that I have to shrink myself, or three, that I have to be quiet about the violence that we're seeing. And so, I think, again, to encourage those women and gender diverse folks, both within politics and journalism, to speak out. I think that the more that we speak out, the more that we put these things on display for the public to see, the more opportunity there is for discourse and for change.
That was NDP MLA Nahani Fontaine. The actions in the video have been widely condemned by politicians and others across the country. So far, no charges have been laid in verbal attack on Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. RCMP say they are investigating. Counteroffensive in Kherson, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky vows to push Russia's military back to the border and warns Russian forces to flee the country. We'll bring you the latest from the war in Ukraine. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Ukraine's second largest city appears to be back in the crosshairs of Russian missiles, bringing the war to the doorsteps of civilians far from the front lines further south. Susan Ormiston has more from Kharkiv.
As fighting ramps up in the south, unrelenting Russian attacks in the east, in Kharkiv. We arrived here shortly after a strike, mid-morning. A cafe chair splintered. Someone was badly injured here or died. The mayor counted 4 deaths and 11 injured in separate strikes. The owner of a shattered pharmacy measures out the damage, angry. They do it in the middle of the day. They're barbarians, says Alexander Maltsev. A caregiver, Valentina Pisareva, rushed here to help her patient. Since the start of the war, we've been sleeping in the basement. At night, I'm lying and counting the hits, and then in the morning I turn on the TV to hear about them. She climbs the stairs through broken glass, 5 floors, heavy steps, saddened by this war and its carnage. A pensioner, she has nowhere else to go. A woman in the top apartment doesn't want to speak with us. She has disabilities.
Yes, she very upset.
Dennis, a volunteer, has shown up to help.
It's such a strange war.
How do you mean?
War against civils, mostly.
A young man, Alexander, checks out his apartment. He'd left for work just 30 minutes before the strike. I don't think their target was our building, he says. Our mayor said the shelling was random. Random shelling. Too familiar. A cleanup crew knows its job well, dispatched by the city. A soldier excavates to find fragments and the fuse, clues to what actually hit. Kharkiv is just 40 kilometers from the Russian border. Kharkiv is a strategic place for Russians and Ukrainians. Ukrainians hold this city, the second largest in Ukraine, but they are under constant bombardment. In the city center over the weekend, 2 large missiles leaving huge craters, just an ongoing terrorizing of the people here in Kharkiv. Another strike on an inexplicable target, a kindergarten yard. The kids were gone, but 2 teachers were wounded. There's no warning where the next shells will land. As the front lines shift and move, this city remains a target, and those left pray for an end. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Kharkiv.
The first shipment of grain from Ukraine to the drought-stricken Horn of Africa since the war began has arrived. The UN-chartered vessel carrying 23,000 tons of wheat has docked in the Red Sea port of Djibouti. It's one of the more than 50 ships that have sailed from Ukraine under a deal guaranteeing safe passage. The cargo will be bagged and transferred to Ethiopia, where 20 million people are facing famine. And Estonia has remained a staunch supporter of Ukraine ever since the Russian invasion more than 6 months ago. Earlier this month, the Baltic nation even removed a Soviet-era monument outside the town of Narva. Estonia has also closed its border to Russian tourists and is pushing the rest of Europe to do the same. Briar Stewart has more from the Estonia-Russian border.
I'm in Narva, Estonia, in the eastern part of the country, and just across the river, which only spans a couple hundred meters here, lies Russia and the community of Ivanogorod. Now, this is quite a picturesque but also surreal location because you have these 2 historic fortresses facing each other across the river. Over there you have the Russian fortress with the Russian flag, and on this side there's the Estonian fortress with the Estonian flag. And both sides of the riverbank and the countries are connected by this bridge, which is called the Friendship Bridge. It's a pretty ironic name when you consider just how much this relationship has soured. In fact, Estonia has put in place a visa ban that will affect tens of thousands of Russians from coming here and transiting through the EU. But it only affects Russians who hold Schengen area visas issued by Estonia. So they're prevented for coming over here and doing things for tourism or for business. But there are exceptions made for Russians that are coming over here to visit family. Estonia, along with Latvia and Finland, are calling on the EU to put in place similar measures and to do more, to actually restrict more Russians. What Estonian officials say is they don't think it's fair to have Russians over here enjoying themselves on vacation when you have a war raging in Ukraine. But this issue is very divisive for the EU. You have countries like Germany and Italy and France that don't want to put in place a ban. They think it's too punitive against ordinary Russians. But Estonia has said that if the EU doesn't act altogether, it's prepared to move forward on its own. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Narva.
The UN is appealing for millions of dollars in international aid to help flood-ravaged Pakistan. Record-breaking floods have killed more than 1,100 people since mid-June. More than 1 million homes have been destroyed in the unprecedented monsoon rains. And behind those are stark numbers, are ordinary people and the receiving end of the environmental disaster. Salima Sivji has that story.
The relentless rains may have stopped for a spell, but the deluge is everywhere. The devastation complete. Huge swaths of land, a full third of the country, now underwater, with millions of Pakistanis forced to scramble for shelter on whatever dry square of land they can find. That reality is barely sinking in. We lost everything in the water. We only escaped with a few things, this man says. Now we sit here out in the open. At the mercy of the elements, the heat stifling. This farmer has been sleeping outside for a week. Only now has he gathered enough supplies to build a meager roof for his family. We have nothing. I can't even feed my children, he says. We need help. That need is acute all across Pakistan's 4 provinces, where thousands of homes and roads are now gone. An estimated $10 billion in damages in a country already in the throes of an economic crisis.
At the moment, our main concern is to save lives.
And aid workers are struggling to keep up and get to those in need.
It's really, really devastating. The infrastructure has been completely decimated. And you know, this is not the only worry. When the water subsides, it's all the waterborne diseases that we're afraid will come.
The United Nations has sent out an urgent call for millions of dollars in international aid for a country that has barely contributed to global emissions and yet is suffering disproportionately from the effects of climate change.
The Pakistani people are facing a monsoon on steroids, the relentless impact of epochal levels of rain and flooding. Today, it is Pakistan. Tomorrow, it could be your country.
But relief is still far off, with the waters of Pakistan's main rivers so swollen and more rain to come later in the week. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Mumbai.
This summer's monsoon rains are not just a problem in Pakistan. Neighboring India is dealing with a swollen Ganges River that's flooding its banks. Relentless rains have caused the river to overflow and inundate nearby communities. These residents say they lost all their belongings to the flood, and with whole neighborhoods underwater, many locals don't know where to go to keep dry. Monsoon season from June to September accounts for more than 70% of India's annual rainfall. And some of the worst violence in years has erupted in Iraq. The streets of Baghdad have been the scene of 2 days of deadly fighting. At least 30 people have been killed. Much of the violence has occurred around the capital's fortified green zone. The district is home to the presidential palace and many foreign government offices. Supporters of powerful cleric and politician Muqtada al-Sadr has been clashing with security forces. It broke out following al-Sadr's resignation from parliament. His party won the largest share of seats in Iraq's parliament in elections almost a year ago, but not enough for a majority. The party has been unable to form a coalition with other Shia groups. And the man who is credited with bringing the Cold War to a peaceful end has died. Former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev was 91. Gorbachev led the Soviet Union, first as the head of the Communist Party and then as president from 1985 to 1991. He worked to implement social democratic reforms and introduced his policy of glasnost, or openness to Soviet government. He also engaged with the United States to limit nuclear weapons, significantly reducing Cold War tensions and winning the Nobel Peace Prize for those efforts in 1990. The Soviet leader oversaw the collapse of the Iron Curtain and the fall of Berlin Wall, which led to the reunification of Germany. Gorbachev had worked to keep the Soviet Union intact, but it dissolved after an unsuccessful coup in 1991, and he resigned. Gorbachev continued to campaign for social democratic reforms in Russia after he left government. Twitter and Elon Musk's multi-billion-dollar fight took a new turn today. The two sides are getting ready to go to court later this year, but Musk is trying to get back out of a deal to take over the social media giant. And as Scott Peterson explains, Musk is now attempting to attract a former Twitter employee to his side of the case.
According to the whistleblower, he made complaints to his managers and to his employers at Twitter, saying that there were shortcomings as far as the technology, that he was worried how the social media site handled the personal information of its customers and also the lack of protections for those customers themselves, and saying that the reason he pointed that out was the reason he got fired. So there's no surprise why Elon Musk's legal team reached out as quickly as they did. Now, Musk is trying to get out of that $44 billion deal. He said that Twitter management withheld information about fake accounts, them saying that there was only maybe about 5% of total accounts that were fake. Elon Musk says that that is much higher. Twitter, for their part, have always dismissed that, saying that they had full disclosure with Elon Musk, but hence we're seeing this going to trial as of October the 17th, with now both sides, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, and Twitter, after this whistleblower witness. For his part, the whistleblower's name is Peter Zatko, and he is taken to some pretty media-savvy terms of his own. He's hired his own legal team and has made a statement saying that he's not happy about being torn between Twitter and that Mr. Musk saying that his legal obligations of the subpoena, that he will appear at the disposition, but in an involuntary matter. And this is a quote by Mr. Zatko saying that he did not make whistleblower disclosures to the appropriate government bodies to benefit Musk or to harm Twitter, but rather to protect the American public and the Twitter shareholders. So now, no doubt, this is going to be a very interesting and revealing trial starting in October between Mr. Musk and Twitter. Scott Peterson, CBC News, Toronto.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced some new initiatives in the federal government's ongoing affordable housing programs. Over the next 5 years, Ottawa expects to spend $2 billion to build thousands of housing units.
Through this fund, we will be investing to create 10,800 housing units, including 6,000 affordable units. We're also creating a stream under this fund for a new rent-to-own pilot.
The money, which was allocated in the last two federal budgets, will come from Affordable Housing Innovation Fund. Today's announcement falls under the National Housing Strategy, which was launched in 2017. It's a 10-year, $72 billion plan to create more housing across the country.